The final item of business today is members' business debate on motion number 8741 in the name of Dennis Robertson on Eating Disorder Awareness Week. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I invite members who wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible. Now call on Mr Robertson to open the debate. Mr Robertson, 7 minutes, please, or thereby.
7 minutes or thereby. It's 11 last time. Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, it was 2 years ago this week I stood in this very spot and opened my first members' debate. And it was a members' debate that was emotional for me, and it was certainly at a time I was grieving the loss of my daughter, Caroline. Presiding Officer, at the time, during that debate, it was about raising the awareness on eating disorders. And I come back to the Chamber today to give the Chamber an update as to where we are and where I hope we're going. Presiding Officer, this week, in fact yesterday, was the 3rd anniversary of Caroline's death. But this debate and the previous one, for me, is about leaving a legacy in Caroline's name. This week we have many events within the Parliament. This afternoon I had the pleasure of sitting in with the CAMS teams from Greater Glasgow, Lothian and Grampian. And apart from the psychologists that were there and the specialist nurses, we had parents of people with eating disorders. And although the medical profession and the clinicians and the specialists are important, and they are, the parents and those with eating disorders are more so. Presiding Officer, I'd like to welcome many of those people that were there this afternoon into the gallery, along with many of the parliamentary staff, and a special mention to my wife Anne. Presiding Officer, the pain never leaves you, although the period of grieving eases. Where are we now? Well, during the first debate, I did raise the awareness, and I hoped at that time we would raise the awareness among GPs, guidance teachers, school nurses, and the medical profession in general. I believe we have come a long way, Presiding Officer, because there's more GPs now aware of eating disorders. They're more aware and they can refer at an earlier stage. But the sad thing is, Presiding Officer, young people are still dying. Young people are still dying because the mental illness is such that sometimes the pathway to recovery just can't be found. It's in many ways with a heavy heart that I do stand here, but it's important that I do. And it's important that MSPs like myself go into their constituencies and listen to those patients and those parents and those clinicians who are fighting this illness. Just at the end of last year, Presiding Officer, we held the first conference of specialist school nurses and guidance teachers at Portlethen, just outside Aberdeen. And that conference was taken forward by a head teacher, Neil Morrison, who at the time when Caroline died, he was a deputy principal at West Hill Academy in my own constituency. But there was a young girl with an eating disorder in his school, and he felt that we needed to do something. He felt that the awareness needed to be within the schools. So together, along with other people within the Grampian area, the conference was held. It was a success. And now I believe a conference has been taken here in Edinburgh, on the same lines. We are moving forward. That pathway isn't as difficult as it was back then. The awareness amongst the media has shifted, I believe. No longer do I hear the same stories of the sensationalism about people with eating disorders, although I still challenge Channel 4 and their super-size, super-skinny programme, which I mentioned in my last debate and I mentioned in this one, because I think it demeans the problem with eating disorders. It sensationalises it to a point. And I would challenge them, as I did then, to speak with me, and they haven't. Presiding Officer, this week we have a conference here in this Parliament on Friday. We will be looking at the aspects of media, social media. We will be looking at the fashion industry and how it impacts on people with eating disorders. But the most important of all, is we will be having a debate with families and carers, the people that need to be listened to. Presiding Officer, it is a difficult journey. It's a journey that I feel that I will have to continue, not just for this debate, but for many years to come. Because I fear that many, many more young people will die. Excuse me, Presiding Officer. I feel that many more young people will lose their lives through this dreadful illness. But we must do what we can, and it's not just about the resources. It's about networking. It's about sharing good practice. This is a global problem, a problem right across the world. But I believe here in Scotland, we can take it forward. We can be leaders, and we should be. Presiding Officer, thank you.
Thank you. Many thanks. I now call on Christian Allard to be followed by Malcolm Chisholm.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And thank you to everybody who has been listening to Dennis's speech. I have to offer my apology to Dennis. 2 years ago, I wasn't here. I was not yet an MSP. But I did watch the debate that he participated in eating disorders, the members' debate that he put forward 2 years ago. Like many people will be watching today online or on TV. It talks about a journey, and I can maybe, Presiding Officer, explain a little bit what type of journey Dennis and his family has been through. And that's a journey that a lot of people, a lot of families are unfortunately going through. I was not here 2 years ago, but 3 years ago, when Caroline died, I was with Dennis, Anne and Fiona. And I tried to give as much support as I could, not always using the right words, not knowing about the issue, not always knowing what to say or what to do. And I think putting this issue to the Scottish Parliament and trying to create more awareness for the issue is for every one of us. It's for every one of us to understand not only what the sufferers are going through, but what the families are going through, what the guardians are going through, what the siblings are going through. And I would like to take this opportunity to really thank Dennis and his wife Anne, who is here today, to have the strength to champion this issue. But this is an issue we should all champion. Dennis talked about a meeting with Neil Morrissey as deputy head of a local academy. I was at that meeting, and Neil said something strange at the end of the meeting. He said, "Christian, I've been to a lot of meetings with you, and this is the first one when you didn't say a word." And there is something very important in all this, and why Dennis is so the right person to lead this debate, is Dennis has got fantastic listening skills. And I remember that meeting when he listened to every one of them, to the teachers, to the parents, and knowing what the issue is about and how it affected them. So we need a lot more support for professionals, but more importantly to parents, to guardians, to siblings, families and friends like me. I think there needs to be a lot more awareness, and this awareness, unfortunately, through the media, is sometimes far too sensationalized, like Dennis pointed out. And we need to treat this issue like any other issue of that importance, suffering, where a lot of people are suffering, and unfortunately, some people like Caroline who don't go through it. We passed legislation last week regarding children and young people. And this legislation was talking about trying to get professionals from not only education, but from the police and from health, all working together. And I think we really need this. We need everybody to work together. And the idea that families have to go through this kind of suffering from one of their children without having the help is unbearable. To finish off, Presiding Officer, I would like to say, like Dennis said, it's a global thing, and we can do something here at Parliament. My niece left a clinic in Paris last week for home under similar circumstances. She had a problem, eating disorder, and now she's self-harming. And I think all these issues are all bound together, and we really need to have the support of everybody to help families to go through this. Thank you, President.
Thank you very much. Now call on Malcolm Chisholm to be followed by Mark Obiaji.
Presiding Officer, in thanking and congratulating Dennis Robertson on bringing forward this motion, I would firstly like to join others in the Chamber by honouring the memory of Dennis's very dear daughter, Caroline. I would also like to show my absolute support for Dennis's motion and put on the record my admiration for his strength of character in tirelessly campaigning to improve the lives of so many others who suffer. While we as parliamentarians can do our best to provide a framework for clinical and emotional support, we must also acknowledge the need to engage with others in campaigning and awareness raising. Before mentioning some of what's been done, I want to touch on why it's necessary, with up-to-date statistics on the task that confronts us. Materials published by the Royal College of Psychiatrists in Scotland cite studies that suggest I quote, prevalence of eating disorders in teenage girls as high as 13%, with about 1% meeting criteria for anorexia nervosa. And we also know, of course, that male eating disorders are increasingly being recognised. The conditions are seen throughout life because of persistence, recurrence or new occurrence. UK figures provided by the National Institute of Health and Clinical Excellence suggest that 1.6 million people in the UK are affected by an eating disorder, of which around 11% are male. What is encouraging is that this has now become a recognised mental health problem. As we learn more as to how best to approach treatment and awareness raising, we start to see stories of help and successful recovery. I've seen figures, for example, suggesting that almost 50% of people with anorexia nervosa or bulimia do make a full recovery. But as Dennis Robertson has reminded us, far too many people are still dying. The Royal College of Psychiatrists in Scotland point out that anorexia and bulimia nervosa are not always exclusively a result of attempts to regulate appearance. They may in some cases relate to deeply rooted trauma and other mental health issues. They correctly point out that management of disorders, quoting again, depends on people being helped to tolerate difficult feelings without using dysfunctional strategies. This fundamentally comes down to giving individuals an opportunity to come forward and present confidentially, creating a relationship of trust, and then equipping that individual with the tools to adopt new coping strategies. Ideally, this would include help from friends and family who require support and direction to cope with the pressure and distress often felt. Later this week, I'll be chairing a session at the all-day conference that Dennis Robertson mentioned, and the conference in general will explore the challenges faced by individuals and their families. And the particular session that I will be chairing on individuals and families will discuss the issues faced by families and carers in supporting those who suffer. And that clearly is a very important matter, as the better equipped a family are to recognise and understand destructive behaviours, the more able they will be to offer support with less of the fear and anxiety often experienced. The conference will also address the role of new technologies in eating disorders, particularly social media. While this will in part analyse the impact of negative images on young people and the effect of media pressures, I hope it will also look at how new online technologies and apps can be used as a tool. There is, however, no substitute for face-to-face therapy and a supportive human relationship in the fight against eating disorders. That is why it is important to make sure this is available at the point where a patient presents to GPs. And I was pleased to hear Dennis Robertson say that the awareness and knowledge of GPs has increased markedly. And of course, there are several excellent examples of services in Scotland. For example, the Managed Clinical Network for Eating Disorders that was set up at the end of 2005, covering Grampian, Tayside, Highland, Orkney, Shetland and the Western Isles. I see my time has more or less run out, so in closing, Presiding Officer, I once again wish to congratulate Dennis Robertson on bringing this debate to the Chamber. 2 years have passed, as he said at the beginning, since he last introduced a members' debate on this particular subject, and we're a little closer to gaining a better understanding of this complex and challenging mental health problem. More importantly, we have been able to show our own support as a Parliament for the incredible work being done across the country and put the full weight of our cross-party backing behind them. We must speak out so that in future the thousands who suffer feel able to speak out as well.
Many thanks. Now call on Marco Biaggi to be followed by Nanette Milne.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In 2010, the Royal College of Psychiatrists UK-wide said in a very well-covered public statement at the time, although biological and genetic factors play an important role in the development of these disorders, psychological and social factors are also significant. And as Malcolm Chisholm pointed out, there are dysfunctional strategies here, but there are also contributing factors. The RCP called for public restraint on how these issues and eating disorders in general are portrayed in society. As we've heard, some areas have seen more progress than others. As a policymaker, I cannot change biology or genetics, but social factors do come perhaps within the ambit of what can be changed. Almost 200 years ago, the poet Byron starved himself out of 5 stones in weight. He triggered a moral panic as the ladies of the court went on a rice and vinegar diet to try and imitate him. Move on 2 centuries and we have Atkins, Ducan, South Beach, 5-2, Paleo, cabbage soup, apple cider vinegar, acai berry, Slim Fast, Weight Watchers, fruitarianism and Beyoncé's diet of maple syrup and cayenne powder. Some of these are motivated by health, but human beings, being what human beings are, most are at least in part motivated by other reasons. It's a £2 billion industry that has grown up to make people feel like they can look like the £21 billion fashion industry repeatedly says they should look. Many people today, I believe, are caught between an immovable object of how they are told they should look and the irresistible force of a relentless and seductive marketing of fast food. We should remember that the makers of Slim Fast are indeed also the makers of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. It's an industry I accept in a small way, put a roof over my head, a chip shop family. It put clothes on my back and so much food on the table that I left school at age 18 clinically obese. UK figures are hard to find, but in the US, the sum of less healthy food advertising was estimated by Yale academics in 2010 at $4.2 billion per year. Even if you scale for size, I'm sure that far dwarfs the Minister's health promotion budget. We all like to believe that advertising, the magazines, the TV shows, the body images, the presentation of what is normal doesn't get to us, that we alone can stand against that tide. Very briefly.
Dennis Robertson.
I thank Mark Biaggi for taking the intervention. You may be aware that in Israel they have brought out legislation within the fashion industry, and the models themselves cannot be below a BMI of 12.5. Now, it's still very low, but at least the industry, and they've got legislation for that industry. So there are steps in other countries. I'm not suggesting we take legislation, but there are steps being taken.
Take your time, Mr. Biaggi.
Indeed, I saw that when I was researching this. I think it is a very useful example. It's not often we necessarily look to that country for examples, but in this case, I think it certainly is one we might want to follow. But going back to how this is portrayed, you know, we like to think that we're different here, but we know in politics that there's a certain look that commands airtime in column inches, just like everywhere else, in a way that the other looks might not. And you have to factor into all of this subconscious chaos that we do actually live in a nation where 62% of adults are overweight. We face a dual-effect dilemma. You take a stand that is even slightly off-key and you can trigger a counterproductive anxiety amongst the general overeaters, while giving those who take to the corners of the internet, the pro-Ana websites, that give them validation that they can whisper to each other. The human mind is a great tangled complexity. Sadly, to date too, this has been a gendered problem, affecting women more than men to the tune of 9 times, consistent across countries. And I would say as well, though, that there is a crying need for more peer-reviewed research somewhere in the world into the reports also of a greater propensity to eating disorder amongst men who are gay or bisexual. Now, looking ahead, we can't all be Naomi Wolf and attempt to tackle this beauty myth single-handedly, nor has anyone solved how to be passionately evangelistic about sensible moderation, two approaches that seem to be almost contradictory. But there is a human cost to the explosion of eating disorders across the developed world. It's a cost that's paid in every life lost and every life ruined. These are illnesses that are real, they are terrible, they are life-limiting, and we owe it to ourselves to look at all the factors that may be causing them and to take resolute action. And until that solution is found, let's raise awareness, let's reach out, let's try to understand and help anyone around us whose life may be a silent daily battle with one of these conditions.
Many thanks. I now call on Dr. Annette Milne to be followed by Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I too add my thanks to Dennis Robertson for once again bringing to the Chamber the challenging and complex subject of eating disorders, and I of course acknowledge his tragic personal experience of this issue and his ongoing strenuous efforts to make things better for people who are still struggling with their own personal battles with these conditions. Last November, Dennis Robertson also led a members' debate on one aspect of eating disorders, namely that of the presence in culture and fashion of an unrealistic image of size 10 models and mannequins, referred to really by Marco Biaggi. The knock-on effect of such images on vulnerable people, especially young girls, was highlighted. And I hope that this area will play a part of this week's Eating Disorder Awareness Week. I also hope that this week will look at other areas, and I would like to use the time available to me to focus on situations which occur in our schools, colleges and universities. The UK-wide programme of events organised by BEAT to promote a further understanding of illnesses such as anorexia and bulimia is very impressive. In particular, I welcome events taking place in our university towns, from Durham to Bournemouth, where students arrive for the first time in unfamiliar settings to face the challenges of student life. This is indeed a difficult time for young people, adjusting to being away from home and from their parents, making new friends and meeting students from other backgrounds, and dealing with the pressures of their academic subjects. A recent survey of 200 students with eating disorders found that 32% of them were diagnosed after starting their course, and almost a fifth said that their condition had forced them to drop out of university altogether. I fully acknowledge the important role that student support bodies play in reaching out to people on campuses who have eating disorders. But that same survey has shown that a significant majority, nearly 70% of those asked, said that they'd struggled to access treatment while at university. So clearly we need to do more. When it comes to schools, I won't be the only person in the Chamber who was shocked by reports in various newspapers regarding what the Times described as a silent epidemic of anorexia sweeping through Britain's top independent schools, affecting thousands of teenage girls. The desire to achieve high grades and the competitive nature of highly academic girls' schools is something which is often celebrated and championed. I make absolutely no criticism of this, but there are also risk factors contributing to eating disorders at such schools, as key experts such as Susan Ringwood of BEAT has identified. Unlike the state sector, there are no guidelines on the provision of pastoral and psychological support for pupils in independent schools. I do recognise that many of these schools do have a designated teacher responsible for pupils' well-being, as well as nurses and counsellors to deal with the issues such as anorexia, which affect teenage girls. However, quite clearly, some girls, especially those away from home at boarding schools, do feel more vulnerable and at risk of turning to eating disorders as a response to the stresses associated with such institutions. On a more positive note, I read with great admiration of a student at Edinburgh called Constance Barter, who had the courage to speak publicly at the weekend about her battles with anorexia while at school. She described how her desire to succeed as a runner on the track led her down the road to an eating disorder. After the initial feeling that she wasn't given the emotional support she required, she then describes how once her school became aware of her illness, they were, in her words, very helpful, and that she had a really amazing time there. Sadly, Constance acknowledges that other girls with similar conditions did not recover. And that is why we must have in place in all educational establishments the right tools to aid those who are afflicted by these terrifying and isolating illnesses. Presiding Officer, I welcome the various events being held in Parliament this week, and I hope that the exposure generated will help people, especially teenage girls, to come forward and seek help to tackle the problem of eating disorders. And once again, I thank Dennis Robertson for his enormous contribution to this matter. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now call on Kevin Stewart, after which we move to the Minister for the closing speech.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm proud to call Dennis Robertson my friend, and I'm proud at the fact that he and his wife Anne and his daughter Fiona continue the campaign to have eating disorders recognised by many, many more people. And I know that this is not easy for Dennis, but I think that what he is doing is definitely providing that legacy for Caroline. I also have to say that I'm quite pleased that Parliament itself has rallied and has allowed the conference and the events to take place here this week. And beyond that, the recognition that the government has given in terms of this campaign. But one of the main things about this week, Presiding Officer, is that it gives us all the opportunity to talk to folk in the front line of eating disorders, whether that be folks who have been affected by it, whether they've suffered themselves or they're the family of sufferers, or the professionals. I think that, if you don't learn something new every day, then you're probably failing. And over the past few days, I've learned quite a number of new things about eating disorders. I had the pleasure today to talk to Catherine Kerr, who's a young ambassador for Beating Eating Disorders, BEAT. A very articulate girl who herself suffered from an eating disorder. And we had quite a long conversation, but one thing that struck me during that conversation was she said, "You don't blame someone for having cancer. So why do we blame folk for suffering from an eating disorder?" And far too often in this life, we tend to look at folks with mental health difficulties and treat them so much differently from folk who are suffering from physical ailments. And although I think we're getting better in our response as human beings to these things, I still feel that we have got a very long way to go. And I think the education that is provided through the events that will be held this week in this Parliament will help us in some degree to understand, and hopefully will make us crusaders against those folks who have prejudice against people with mental health difficulties and eating disorders. I think that Beat should be immensely proud of Catherine. She should be immensely proud of herself at the way she articulated herself today. And I understand that she has been speaking at schools, and I think that is of great benefit indeed. Dennis has told me that we have a greater incidence of eating disorders here in the UK than we do in the rest of Europe, and I think that is extremely concerning. And many have already pointed out the fixation that the media has with body image, and I think some people need to reflect on what they're publishing in their magazines, what they're broadcasting on their radio shows or their television programmes. And I do think that if we don't fix some of these issues, then we are going to continue to have this problem. Presiding Officer, I'd like to thank Dennis Robertson for giving us the opportunity to highlight these issues again today. I pay my regards to his wife Anne and daughter Fiona, who I know are a great rock for him, and his staff as well, who have done a huge amount in terms of setting up some of the events here this week. But in particular, I would like to thank those people who are here this week, who are able to articulate their own stories so that we can all learn a little bit more. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. Now call Minister Michael Matheson to wind up the debate on behalf of the Government.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I, like others, offer my congratulations to Dennis Robertson in securing time for this debate. This is a third such debate that Dennis has brought to this chamber, and I've had the responsibility to respond to those previous debates as well. One of the things that always strikes you about the debate that Dennis brings forward on this important issue is the level of personal insight that he's able to offer to this particular issue in itself, which no member in this chamber is able to offer other than Dennis. And in his drive to do something in memory of the loss of his daughter Caroline, I'm sure that no member in this chamber is in any doubt about the work that Dennis has undertaken over the last 3 years, that he has done a tremendous amount in the memory of his daughter, and he continues to undertake a whole range of work in order to build on her memory. Can I, of course,
Dennis Robertson.
I thank the Minister for his kind words, but can I actually pay tribute to the Minister, because the Minister has been listening and the Minister has been supportive. And many of the events that are taking place this week and many of the challenges that we've been facing over the past couple of years has been supported by the Minister. And I would just wish to put my thanks on record for the support that he has given this particular issue. Thank you. Minister.
Can I thank the member for his intervention? Of course, it's been certainly my intention to offer what support I can and to do as much as I can in taking this agenda forward in Scotland. And one of the things that has struck me about my engagement in this agenda over the last 3 years with Dennis Robertson and others within the sector has been not only the focus to improve the way in which services are delivered and to take further action around raising greater awareness, but it's also about helping to provide greater support to families and to individuals themselves. And I was honoured to attend the first Scottish Memorial Service at St Giles in Edinburgh back in 2012 with Dennis and his family and many others to remember all of those who have lost their lives through an eating disorder. And I'm sure that all members will recognise that there is a tremendous amount of effort being made by a whole range of individuals and organisations right across the country to raise greater awareness of eating disorders. And I want to take this evening as an opportunity to put on record my tribute to their dedication and to the continued work that they undertake, the professionals, the staff, the volunteers, right across all sectors, and particularly those people with eating disorders and their carers and families who have undertaken a tremendous amount of work to raise greater awareness of this issue and to support families as well. I'm sure that all members will be particularly pleased about the range of activities that are taking place this week as part of the Eating Disorder Week. And this week we have the debate, which several members have made reference to, which I'll be speaking at on Friday. There's already a range of events which are taking place, and I hope some members, I know some will be, joining us in Edinburgh Castle later tonight to join the First Minister's reception in his recognition of Eating Disorder Awareness Week. Presiding Officer, I've listened very carefully to the comments and issues that have been raised by members in the debate. And I want to try and take a little opportunity to provide members with some insight into the work that we are taking forward as a government to tackle eating disorders and to further improve care and support services. The Royal College of Psychiatrists in Scotland, in their briefing in advance of this particular debate, acknowledged that while more needs to be done, and I quote, Scotland has seen striking improvements in the provision of specialist eating disorder services in the past decade. The range of community and specialist inpatient services now in place across the country clearly demonstrate that in itself. Malcolm Chisholm made reference to the managed clinical network in the north of Scotland, and of course we have the specialist eating disorder unit at the Royal Cornhill Hospital in Aberdeen, and we now also have the unit at St John's Hospital in Livingston, serving the east of Scotland, which I had the pleasure of opening a couple of years ago. But our improvement agenda is also driven by work to improve how we can improve mental health services across the country. And that's been taken forward as part of our mental health strategy, which takes us up to 2015, and also a recently published suicide prevention strategy. The mental health strategy will deliver a range of commitments that will impact positively on improving care, services and support to those with an eating disorder and to their families. For example, it's about delivering faster access to psychological therapies, therapies that we know make a significant contribution to treating mental illness like eating disorders. Even before the December 2014 timetable that we've set to ensure no one waits longer than 18 weeks for access to psychological therapies, early data shows that at the end of September last year, 83% of patients began treatment within that time, with the average wait being some 8 weeks. These are encouraging, and they are as a result of significant work that's been undertaken by colleagues across the NHS. Dennis Robertson also made reference to the need to improve and how we have improved access to child and adolescent mental health services. Over several years now, we have put significant additional investment into improving child and adolescent mental health services in order to speed up access to these services, and we have saw that significant improvement occurring over the last couple of years, with the targets being achieved across all of our NHS boards. Alongside that, we are taking forward further work in order to look at how we can improve how we respond to issues such as distress within our community, including those with an eating disorder who may present to our services in distress, to make sure that we respond to them much more effectively and to give them the support and assistance that can assist them more comprehensively than we are at the present time. Presiding Officer, this is an area where we have made progress. Dennis Robertson has been a major driver for much of that progress in recent years. What I can say to this chamber, Presiding Officer, is that the Scottish Government remain committed to making sure that we continue to tackle all issues around eating disorders, and I've got no doubt that all members in this chamber will want to support Dennis Robertson in taking this work forward.
Thank you. And thank you all who have taken part in this debate this evening. I now close this meeting of Parliament.